Hi, everyone. This is Simeon Wong from Elevate.Strategy. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. If you're live, that's great. If it's a rebroadcast, love you guys as well. Today we have an awesome guest. And afterwards, if you're a rebroadcast watching, make sure that you reach out to him, and I'll introduce him in a second. First of all, just a very quick update. This week was excellent for Elevate. We had a number of successful client placements and a couple of very new clients that have very unique backgrounds, including one that's an emergency doctor who is trying to make a change from medicine to somewhat more of an administrative business role. So these kinds of things are exciting and going on. I've got a number of guests that are lined up in the next couple of weeks as well. As you know, this Leadership Live series is intended more towards talking about people's stories and less about the technical aspects of resume writing and all the other stuff that I do as well. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce today's guest. Today we have David Sanders, who's here with me. I first had the opportunity to meet him probably a couple of months ago now and to work with him as well. So just a quick introduction before he comes on stage. He is currently a strategic account director at Microsoft, and he'll talk a little bit about what that means. But formerly, he was a senior partner at Ernst & Young, and he led about $1.4 billion global consulting business in advanced manufacturing and mobility industries. And I don't know what that is. We've talked about before, but it's much more sophisticated than I understand. But that's fine. His reputation precedes him. So. And the practice that he was leading was, the second largest global industry in Ernst & Young. So, not shoddy at all. And why I invited him here today, though, wasn't so much to talk about his qualifications as a client, as a partner, but really more about the journey and the purpose and goal of where it is that he is today. So, without further ado, I'm just going to bring him to front stage. Welcome, David.
Hey, Simeon, how are you?
I'm good. Ooh. Thanks for joining us today and taking an hour of your Friday.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's a sunny day in Detroit, which is rare.
So, yeah. Well, we're in the same time zone. So as we were saying earlier, our weather patterns are probably very similar. So, hopefully the weekend is nice ahead. We can both enjoy that. So, but thank you for coming on. For listeners who are going to be asking the question afterwards around, why are we speaking today? Maybe just kind of go on a little bit first about what is it that you do right now as a professional, and then we'll talk a little bit about the journey that you took in order to get to where you are today. And then one more thing is, for you especially, what's really critical and important in your career journey. But go ahead, you just
sure. Yeah, thanks. So I'm a strategic account director at Microsoft, which means I run the relationship between Microsoft and one of its largest clients globally, which happens to be Dow Chemical. So I spend most of my time between all the activities that Microsoft does and all the activities over at Dow that are somewhat technical, but really around business transformation, which is the theme of my career. I retired last summer. And from Ernst & Young, I hit that mandatory retirement age, and swore I'd never go work for another large company, and look where I am, right? So, and I just felt I had a lot more gas in the tank, and so it's been really, really interesting. I've been at Microsoft about 6 months.
Gotcha. And I challenge you on that initially because you had left, the corporate world in that sense of where you had contributed a lot to already. That was there another chapter in your life, and you decided to go the route of another great company. So that's great. Maybe if you could kind of walk through the listener around what was your career journey? What did you start off with? What did you want to do? And then how did you end up, being a business leader?
Sure. Yeah. I started, I followed my dad's advice, which I'm not sure that was good, but he said, go be an engineer. And so I was a mechanical engineer. And my first job, I worked for IBM. I was a robotics engineer, so I put robots in plants.
Okay.
About almost 40 years ago, kind of the very early stage of plant automation. And I spent about a decade doing that. I got an MBA out at Michigan, and then ended up kind of going between consulting and tech companies. So I
Okay.
spent time at Ernst& Young early. I became a partner pretty early. Then flipped over. We sold our consulting business, so I went to HP. And then I came back to Ernst& Young until I hit retirement age, and now I'm at Microsoft. So the journey has really always been around large-scale transformation, either internally to an operation or mostly the last 30 years with clients. And that's
Right.
what I do. So technology enabled, but a lot of it has to do with, managing large teams of people that are trying to change the way a company does operations, which is
Right.
the theme of my career. I really enjoy that space between a large company and a large client. It's not always easy, but it
Right.
is pretty leading edge stuff that we're trying to do. And I've been proud that most of my career has been doing some really interesting things at the
Mm.
edge of technology, helping companies' operations. That's what I've been doing.
Right. And I'm sure over the years, as the market has changed and technology has changed, that you've seen all kinds of scenarios and people and different challenges. What's the biggest kind of variable around working globally with different companies? Because you had a global account.
Yeah, I've always done global work. I mean, I've traveled. I lived overseas when I was a kid, so I've always traveled a lot with my work. I think it's been how global companies, are trying to transform across their entire operations. I mean, that's
Right.
really hard to do, right? To be able to go in all four corners of the world and be able to help companies transform and do that in a consistent way has been a real challenge. Um, but it's also how technology has fundamentally changed in the last 40 years. I mean, I remember when I got a PC-1 on my desk, right? The first PC
Right.
with
Sure.
10 megabyte or a 10 kilobyte floppy drive. I mean, it was a long time back, and things have changed so much. It's incredible. So I've been very fortunate to be part of this really interesting time, and where technology and businesses really come together.
Right. So you went from being an engineer, did your business degree, and then eventually kind of went up the ranks.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you just very quickly before we go into what means a lot to you, the book title or a movie title that would best describe your journey, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm a big travel reader, right? I like to read Paul Thoreau is one of my favorite authors. So he wrote a book, To the Ends of the Earth, and I think that's kind of both about my career and about kind of my personal journeys. I feel like I'm a kind of a business explorer, right? I've always done things on the edge, both from a technology standpoint, but also in my global work, right? I've been all over
Mm.
the world. So that's the way I think about things. It's my dad taught our family. We picked up in when I was a kid and moved to Italy from Michigan, right? And
Mm.
and I think that move really taught me that it's about getting to see what the world's about. So that's what I'd say. It's been, I probably my wife's not entirely happy with me all the time because I want to go to some obscure place. Uh, it generally works out okay. So that's why I've kind of patterned both how I think about my life
Right.
and about work. Right?
Right. So you're a traveler, and I'm sure with that comes a lot of exposure to different cultures and the way that people do things. And I found that in my professional career that really shapes a lot of being sensitive to what's important to people, right? And how you deal with clients, etc. So I want to segue into the main purpose for why I invited you to come to my live broadcast today, and that is that you have a very unique perspective on the importance of things like family, being a good father and husband, and the integration, I guess, maybe in some sense, of who you are as a person and who you are as a business professional. Would you be able to share about your journey or however you're comfortable with?
Yeah, and I am comfortable talking about this, and it's a pretty personal story, and I think the viewers will understand it pretty quickly. So let me just go back about 30 years. So I was worked for IBM, and I was going to business school at night in Ann Arbor, and it was taking a long time. So I switched to the day program. I took a leave of absence from IBM, and I wasn't going to come back to IBM, but I had medical coverage and took a leave, and I was just at the beginning of that leave, ready to go full time to business school and finish, because we had our first child, and we had a birth accident with our first baby, our daughter, and things just went bad at birth, and as a result, she had lost a lot of blood, and she was born dead but revived. But by then, a lot of damage had been done.
Right.
So she had pretty severe brain damage. She had cerebral palsy. She became blind. She had a pretty dramatic seizure disorder, and didn't really have an IQ, but survived. So she had a beating heart, and we loved her to death. Well, that of course changed the arc of our lives, right? Just changed everything about our lives in an instant. We hadn't had any exposure to people of disabilities, and so it was all brand new, no manual. Just trying to figure out how do we adapt to this immediately different world. Now, my wife's a counselor, so she's been fantastic, and almost been married 37 years now. So throughout the course of all this activity, she's been the rock, right? But what we had to do is find out how to optimize the life of our daughter. Now, Shelby died when she was 6, but what that 6-year journey, I ended up going back to IBM, and what I found is the role of a company, how it supports its employee, is really important, right? You read a lot, and I'm sure you've read this, brochures about work-life balance, and it became really clear to me that there's not really something in my life that was work-life balance. I mean, what I did in my personal life bled into my work life and vice versa. And when we had a daughter with very, very severe needs, being able to get her attention took a ton of time. And IBM, and then I left IBM, and a follow-on employer. I went to work for the president of a big utility, running all their business process redesign work. They knew that our daughter needed a lot of care, and those companies stepped up to help us, and that taught me a lesson that I've carried through my entire life, because we've had other things, pretty dramatic things happen in our lives that I was a recipient of great care from employers, and that's made a substantial difference in how I think about my job as a leader, working with other people. Key points to me is we were not unique by any means, right? What happened to our family, we ended up later on having we had 2 daughters who were doing great, and then we had a 4th child, and we ended up having an amniocentesis at the recommendation. We all had high risk pregnancies, and we lost, as a result of that amniocentesis, we lost another child. So that was very late stage, really dramatic. And so we've had multiple things happen that simply reinforce the issue that you need to understand the full scope of somebody's life when you're leading them. And on the flip side, my view is employees need to, especially men, need to be able to ask for help when things happen, because it happens to everybody. Something happens to everybody. So that's the theme that has really carried through my career. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about, but it's not, it just happens to be the story that we've lived through. I'll tell you later on. Let me give you another example, because there's a third. Our older daughter was, Madison, was for freshman in college, and she came back from college for Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving holiday. During a car, and they had a terrific accident, and the driver of my daughter's car was killed in that accident. My daughter walked out of that accident, and it was right when I come back to EY, and within a month. And it was amazing to see how EY rallied around this new employee, a new partner coming back, and time to take care of my family. And so that's those messages have really stuck with me And I think it adds, for me, it has really helped develop what I think, especially male employees, fathers, dads need to be able to manage in times of crisis.
Right. Yeah. And so during those periods of time, what was, how did you process each one of those events to say, I'm going to deal with it at this point in this way?
Yeah.
And as you go through different stages of processing what that means for other aspects of your lives, what was the most difficult part, right? Because when something happens, the impact of that on different parts of your life doesn't come right away. It comes when, you finally have a chance to settle down, you're sitting back at your laptop again. Tell me about that process of how you adapted.
Yeah, I think in all those cases, maybe there's two dimensions. First is a time dimension, right? What I learned is, especially in times of crisis, you have to deal with the immediate issue. I mean, you have to say, what am I going to do now? And I mean now, like today.
Mm-hmm.
Daughter
Mm-hmm.
was born. It was an immediate issue about what do I need to do to make sure she lives, right? Or my daughter, who was in an
Right.
accident, immediately drove down to the hospital that she was at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a short term, medium term, and a long term plan that has to happen. And what I found is often, too often, people don't think about that long run. I mean, the implications of having a child with disabilities might be a long, 30, 40-year journey, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
start early about how you're going to plan for that. It changes everything about how you think about your life, right?
Right.
And it has a big impact on career choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do
Sure.
I want? What
Yeah.
can I do? What do I want to do? I think my wife and I, fair to say that, coming out of Michigan, we were going to move to the West Coast. I was going to move to technology. We changed all that and changed all that quickly, right? We said,
Mm-hmm.
listen, we'll be here. We stayed in Michigan. In fact, we never moved because we felt that we needed the support of the folks we had here for our broader family. So there
Right.
were decisions that we needed to make over time that were long term. So that was one. And then secondly, it's just the nature of work and
Right.
the importance of work in my life. And in that regard, you know, I saw, and consulting's a pretty tough place to work, right? And when I first came into consulting, I think you've been there, right? So you've seen it before firsthand. It's a
Yep.
very demanding job, right? And
Yep.
so what I saw were a lot of divorced partners, a lot of partners with alcohol problems early on,
Right.
and a, but moreover, a lot of dads that never saw their kids grow up. And
Mm.
so, one of the things it did for me is rebalance the importance of this work and home life exchange. I don't call it balance; it's an exchange. And I said, hey, I'm going to be there no matter what for my kids. When I went to consulting first time, I was pretty open about it. I said, listen, I cannot travel. I have an extremely disabled daughter at home, and to be in consulting and not travel is not an easy thing to do. I
Right.
clearly made decisions in my career that potentially limited my growth,
Right.
but
Right.
didn't,
Yeah.
because the overall balance between my family's growth and my career growth was the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe other people didn't make those decisions. They would move to another city. They would pick their family up and move multiple times
Right.
globally,
Right.
whatever. And consulting is very common. I decided not to do those things, but
Right.
I did it consciously. Right. So
Right.
there's a dimension in this exchange. What exchange is worthwhile?
Yeah.
Some people toggle that whole exchange. They give up their entire family life for work.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that was something I may have been on that path before Shelby was born, but I certainly wasn't on it after she was born. Right.
Right.
So,
Have
so
you
that,
always, I'm curious to know, have you always had this sense of the need for responsibility as a father, as a husband, even before you started working? I mean, in the professional services?
yeah, I mean, listen, we always gave to the community, did things like that, right? So we were always kind of partial to doing that kind of work. I think more so after our daughter was born, we had to advocate, and that's something I encourage employees to do. Is when things happen in their families, you got to advocate for yourself. You got to go fight for it.
Mhm.
We advocated for help for our daughter, and it was just an enormous amount of work because, first of all, we didn't know anything about that whole world, about what was out there. We lived in a place that had a lot of services for children with disabilities, but we made too much money, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Around some of that. But it got us very involved. And what happened out of that, Simeon, was for me, there was an interesting thread between all the places that gave us help. And for us, it happened to be the United Way back in this area.
Right.
And my wife and I ended up being very involved in the United Way for about 20 years and as a way, because we really believed in the mission, but we believed in it because we were recipients of the goodness that this group did. So I think
Right.
it reinforced our involvement in community. I sit on a board of a Forgotten Harvest, which is a big food rescue organization now.
Right.
So my wife and I always, and she's a counselor, she's always been involved in helping the lives of others. So I think being recipients of help
Mhm. Mhm.
totally changes your perspective about how important these
Right.
social. So yeah, I'd say it accelerated and increased the importance of these things in our lives. Right.
Right. And that's the thing that I admire about your story and about the emphasis that you place on all of that. And in the midst of that, you were able to, develop this 1.4 billion portfolio of clients that are global, second largest in, Ernst& Young. And I mean, that speaks to perhaps the fact that sometimes we feel that we're indispensable, but in a sense, you're not indispensable, but if you do things the right way, you can become quite important, quite influential in many, in your case, clients' lives, right? And even if it's remote and you don't need to travel necessarily there. Uh, coming from consultant, for me, I certainly admire that fact. I remember the very first project that I was on back in the early 2000s. I was on the East Coast doing a refinery project, and I was fresh out of business school, and I was sitting in a car with a senior partner, and I naively asked him, so how do you balance work life, because you live in the middle of Canada, and now you're on the East Coast. And he paused and he looked at me and he said, I don't balance.
Yeah.
I don't balance. I actually have chosen to put my career first. And my wife knew that before getting into, my life. And that's not even sort of a politically correct answer, right? So it kind of shocked me. And I think that does speak to priorities and the fact that some people feel that that's more important, and that's fine.
So yeah, I'm not going to judge whether that's right or
Correct.
wrong. So it wasn't the path that we took. Now it may have been the path that I took if
Correct.
it hadn't happened, but I
Correct.
think those are decisions that everybody needs to make, right?
Right.
And there's plenty of people that do that and are just fine, right?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
also seen people that have toggled that far, and
Yeah.
they when they're done with that part of their career,
Right.
that they have things that they need to do in their home life that have not been attended to.
Right.
And now that's not an indictment of that decision, because sometimes those decisions work out fine, and that happens in all professions, obviously, not just consulting. It wasn't going to be an option for us.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
took it from not being an option to being, how do we build our lives around it, right? And I'll give you an example. So our kids swam in high school. I had two big clients. I had General Motors and I had Ford, which are both in Detroit, where we live. So I had global travel, but I wasn't gone for huge stretches of time. A week here and there. But what we always did is we always vacation together. Matter of fact, in about a month, they're out of college and working now. As long as you pay for their vacation, they keep showing up.
Right.
So we're going on vacation with them, and I think we have an unusually tight family. So I think the result of the decisions we made has
Yeah.
been a really well-functioning, despite some tragedies, a
Right.
really well-functioning, very close family. So for us, it's worked out quite nicely. I'll tell you that, and we saw this firsthand, especially with families that have children with disabilities. The story is not usually very rosy. right? The divorce rates for families that have children with that are multiply severely disabled, like Shelby was, is very, very high.
Mhm.
Sometimes some things I've read is upward to 80%, and we saw firsthand the burden on mothers is enormous, right? So
Right.
the dads get buried in work, or they leave, or there's alcoholism, or a lot of things happen because how difficult it is to take care of children that are very severely disabled. Um, and we saw that early. We recognized it. I think because my wife is in the social services space, we were very attuned to it, and we got a lot of help. All right, we got a lot of, and that was really important for us. And I
Right.
think it has a lot to do with how we've ended up, which is, I think we're in a good spot, right?
Right.
We're in a really
Gotcha.
good spot.
Yeah, that's really a great reminder. And yeah, and there was no judgment on my part around the response that
Sure.
the partner had given to me. It was just the first realization that dawned on me that there are multiple priorities that people can choose to live out their lives. And it's but to hear you also speak candidly around sort of behind the curtain, right, of what sort of happens among some of the partner groups. And I never made it to partner, but I know that there are behind the curtain stories that obviously are not particularly always encouraging. And so for people who are kind of going up that ladder, it's important to know that some of these things are risks that you might take. So but in any case, the unique thing about your story, and I really wanted to, and the rebroadcast is going to be wide because I know passion and purpose for career is very important, near and dear to the hearts of many, especially my clients, and many of whom are, kind of maybe have another 10 or 15 years left in their career.
Yeah.
And their question is, have I done enough? And my question is back to them is always, how do you define enough? What's important to you, right? And if you haven't kind of built a career towards what's important to you, then maybe you should start asking that question about how you do that.
Yeah.
I hope people will reach out to you to ask you for your thoughts on certain things. And I know for a fact, as I'm speaking with my clients, that I've always thought I should connect them with you too. But then you'd be bombarded by a lot of strange people. So
You said something just now that I think it's a really important word, and that word is enough, right?
yeah,
And it's how you define some folks define enough in one dimension of their life, right? It might be work, right? It may be enough means I need to be a partner, or I need to be a CEO, or I need to be a senior executive, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there. Others maybe do it along another dimension. Maybe it's volunteering, or maybe it's their family, or what. And to me, it was really understand. You helped me do this, by the way. You helped me look at the different dimensions of my life
right.
and look at enough along the dimensions that mattered to me. And what I found is that I had a lot of different dimensions that I wanted to, everything from health to how my kids were doing to my work, and I'll put that in context. So when I decided to come back to work after I retired, I really judged what I really wanted to do, and I'd run practices before, and I'd run very large global teams before, and I don't know if I was all that thrilled doing that. What I really liked to do, and I thought it was enough for me to do at this stage of my career, was to sit between a large technology company and a large client, and that to me was enough. I mean, could I do more at this stage? I think I could, but it would be at the detriment of some other dimension in my life at this stage in my life.
Yeah.
For me, that enough question, I think you have to think about the dimensions you want to measure that over. The time that you're at in your career. Now, I've given a lot of advice to young folks. If they're not married, if they're brand new in their career, enough may be, and these are our kids. Toggle on a bunch of different things, explore a bunch of things at the same time. Push yourself. Maybe go back to grad school while you're working, or because now you have the flexibility. That definition of enough is a lot different when they're 35 or when they're 50 or when they're 6 for me, early 60s.
Right.
And so I think you helped me really think through that a bit. I do think that's an important question that people don't think about enough. They'll think about it in retirement.
Right, right,
In
right,
their career, I've seen a lot of people, you probably have,
right.
they're thrilled at what they're doing. They're 50 and they don't necessarily like their work. I mean, I read the stats. A lot of people in the U.S. are not, and in Canada aren't really happy with what they do, right? And
Yeah.
so, I think that's a question you need to keep asking yourself. Am I doing the things I want to do? Are the dimensions right? And am I doing
Mhm.
enough in each of those that maximize what I want to do in my life? And that's the overall message I've tried to live by.
Mhm.
I think our first daughter Shelby helped me get that figured out, and then you helped to reinforce it in the last year for me, frankly.
Right, right. Yeah, and anyone who has any questions around how that balance works, again, I implore you, whoever's watching, again, the rebroadcast, to talk to David. Okay, so maybe we switch gears a little bit here to say, if you were to give the advice then to folks who are going up the career ladder, just in general, right? We talked about what is enough. We talked about going along the dimension about what matters.
Yeah.
What's one kind of concept that you would say to them? You have to grasp this and try to, put it all together in one sentence or two sentences if you can. But what's one advice that you would give?
My advice has been consistent for the last 20 years: is your work is part of an overall picture of your life, and uh, you need to make a determination about how that part is going to fit into the rest. And that's what I tell people. It's because they'll come to me for career advice, and the first thing I ask them is about the other part of their lives.
Mm,
I think they need to make that decision, that career decision,
right.
everything else that's happening in their lives. And I can't mentor. I do a lot of mentoring for young folks, and I spend a lot more time talking about what makes a difference to them in their overall life. And sometimes it's their job. You know,
Mm,
Not everybody wants to put the time and effort in professional services to be a
mhm,
part of it. It's a painful journey. It's a tough journey. You got to work really hard. Not everybody's willing or able to do it.
right.
Better to know that, when you're 30,
Mm,
and when you've gone through the journey, you're 45 and you're there and you hate it, right? Or that it
right.
really,
Right.
that's it. Longer answer than you wanted, but I said put it in the context of the other person's life. You have to do it, right? We've both seen, and this is not from my employers, or just in general, and the people that we hang out with, people that are not happy,
Yeah.
and you get a lot. We're very fortunate to be able to make decisions in our lives to take different paths.
Right. Sure.
If you're not happy, then change the path you're on.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that process of reflection and introspection it's a hard one, right? It's a hard journey to think about because it sort of you know you're forced to kind of face some of the most difficult, challenging self conversations you have. Sometimes it's because you started out with an ideal certain way, and then you sort of ended up where you are today, and you kind of sit down and reflect on how the deviation happened, and you're like, you know what, that's not really what I wanted. I always had wanted this at the very beginning. But it's never too late, right? As your example shows, and that's the encouraging part, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really isn't too. That's why you have to keep asking the question, right? I mean, we've all been in roles before. I think I had maybe one job. We lived in Boston for a bit,
Right,
and it really wasn't the right place for me.
right,
And it was part of IBM, kind of on the edge of IBM. And we made a change to come back to Michigan. And it was a time for a pivot. And I worked with my wife to say, this isn't really what we thought it was going to be. Let's
right.
change. And that was a really important decision. Now, that doesn't happen for a lot of, a lot of folks don't. It's hard, especially for people maybe with a background like an engineering or an accounting background,
Mhm,
it's more
mhm.
logic-based background. They don't have the skill set necessarily to
Right,
look at their lives and say, God, am I really happy, right?
right,
That's why you have to marry a counselor, right? Because she's always in. doing that, right? And it's a perfect balance. But no, I think it really is. And what I advocate is to go get help. And maybe that's another message to leave is, we tell our kids this. It's there's a perception that those that ask for help are weak, and my belief is that ask for help are really strong, right? Because they recognize they need the help, and and that means to go talk to a career coach or go to talk to a counselor or maybe a minister, somebody that's going to give you objective advice about where you think you are in your life. And a lot of people are really afraid to do that for two reasons. One, it looks like weakness. Second thing is it may bring up some things that aren't great, but that if you can address and deal with, it paves the way for a brighter next few years. And been able to come and I really look at our family, 3 really deep crises that we've been able to weather. Not because we're special or anything, but because we had to, right? And we worked together to do it. And we've been able to get through those. And every family is going to have something, a certain parent getting sick, or a career misstep, or a tragedy, might be a natural disaster. Who knows what it is? But they happen in people's lives one time or another, and you have to be able to ask those questions before you run into that time. That's when you have to make those. Which is tough.
Gotcha.
We had, and I'm going to tell you, we had a lot of questioning and a lot of tears and a lot of hard decisions to make. That all happened. But we did it, and I feel like we asked that question: is it enough? Are we doing the right things? Are we talking about our lives that we want to live? And we changed when we needed to.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing for me is, I've challenged you to get that message out there, in a broader audience. So, if ever you have an opportunity to, just have a plenary speaking or engagement, I wouldn't be surprised if you pick this topic, first of all, and I would love for you to talk more about that. So, all right. Okay, we're gonna end off that serious note here, and again, if anyone who's watching, please feel free to reach out to David. David, I know you're very accessible, but let me ask you: can you tell the listeners maybe one or two quirky things about yourself that no one would really know just by looking at you?
Well, I said earlier I lived overseas when I was a kid, so we got from Michigan, moved to Italy, came back 4 years later, and I was from another planet when I came back. It was pretty interesting. Second, I'm working for Microsoft. I interviewed Microsoft 30 years ago. Okay, and no, if I would have gone to work for Microsoft then, I would be on a beach somewhere, But it's interesting to be the oldest guy at Microsoft. I think I would be the oldest guy there, And it's and I'll tell you the funny story is when I first had my first ice-breaking Teams call inside Microsoft, the first question is, please type in your favorite emoji. I don't have a favorite emoji. I was a little too old to have a favorite emoji. I had to ask my kids what are favorite emoji. So, being the oldest guy at Microsoft is kind of interesting. Right?
Gotcha.
There's a couple of things. But other than that, I'm a pretty good.
Gotcha. Cool. I used to be a marathon runner, so I think that's a really cool thing about yourself as well. All right, I'm going to end off with a few rapid fire questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so what is your alter ego career? If you weren't doing what you're doing today, what would you want to be doing?
Yeah, I would take people on trips. I would go do travel. I'd be not a travel agent, but I do trips around the world. And our teams are always hiking in cities, so that's what we do. So that's what I would do for families. Families don't have a lot of time together, and curate those trips, take people on trips. I think it'd be incredible. I have to pick up my Italian, but to do it in Italy would be great. But to do it anywhere, that's what I would do. No question about it.
So that's your next.
That's my next job. Yeah.
That's your next job. What word do you love the most?
Say again. I'm sorry.
What word do you love the most?
Word. I would say I really love the word passion. I mean, I think you're going to do something, you got to be passionate about it. I love the word, right?
Yeah.
Not in a kind of an odd sense, but put your heart and soul into it, right? I just
Right.
love that, right? Do something with intention, Right? So passion would be a good word for me. Yeah.
Yep. That's
Somebody may read that and think that's a little odd, but in my context, it's just put your heart and soul into it.
yeah. Well, that's one of my tenets for sure, right? Is that your value proposition is about your skills, but your passion as well. So what things do you love to do that make you feel alive, that you would love to build a career on, and then also impact, right? Where is it that you would have the most impact? So I absolutely agree with that. So, and what word do you hate the most?
I think complacency, right? I think I'm just. I think just settling for things is really something that I have a challenge with, right? And I think over time, you drop a lot of people drop their dreams and become complacent. And I think it's too late to look back when you're 80 saying, "I wish I'd done a bunch of stuff." Seems a little trite, but it's true.
Right. Right.
And that's how I'm thinking about my life for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, David, I'm going to let you go now. And I hope people will reach out to you. You're probably one of the unique guests that I'll have coming up. I've got people booked up to end of July, but your story was very powerful. I know for me as a career coach in my life, not expecting it to come from a senior executive like yourself. So it was very refreshing to hear that. But I'll let you go for now. David, thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to speaking with you soon. We'll connect up again pretty soon.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And have people reach out to me, it'd be great. No problem. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good weekend. So there you have it. You understand why David was near and dear to my heart as a guest. And, I love what he had to say about understanding what was enough. And I hope that that's something that's a takeaway for you. I know for my own personal journey coming from corporate to becoming an executive coach, I had to make that decision, right? And so do you around what you're doing today. If you're looking for an alternative role, kind of switching industries, whatever that is, the question you have to have is, what is that dimension of enough, right? Have you had enough of the career path, climbing up the career ladder, getting a better title, getting better pay, or not, right? And your journey is to take one more step perhaps, and then your 5-year goal is to kind of switch out and to do something you're passionate about. And one of the things that is always a topic of conversation is around compensation, and that'll be another discussion for another day around what is enough there, right? But stay tuned. Next week we've got another wonderful guest. I'll keep it a surprise, but I'll be making an announcement pretty soon. But glad you guys could drop in. If you have any questions, even when you're watching the rebroadcast, you can ask them there as well. All right. Take care. Have a good weekend.